So today we're going to really start digging deeper into the church survey. We've looked at the growth principles, how things actually grow. God created the earth, so it would make sense that He knows how things are supposed to grow, and so the more we can tap into those principles, the better. We see those principles in Scripture and um, in nature, but we also see them in the evidence from the thousands of surveys we've done. Last week we talked about the process of the cycle, which is how we get into growth by removing barriers. And we talked about applying the cycle at the congregational level, but also at the individual and small group level. And today we're going to go deep dive into the NCD Church Survey. And for those of you who've been sort of wondering, when are we going to get to the church survey? Here we are. We're finally here. So we're going to talk primarily about conducting the survey, and we're going to talk about the test phase of the growth cycle. So that's where the church survey fits in. So we're going to put you into breakout groups, I think of 4 people again. And the way to figure out who's going to be your spokesperson is identify the person whose first name is alphabetically last, and they'll be the summarizer. Shane's going to put the questions into chat before you go into your rooms. And this is just a bit of a chance to review session 2. For those of you who weren't at session 2, you may just feel like you're listening. But if you know something about the cycle, certainly feel like you can contribute. There's Joe. Welcome,
Here,
Joe.
finally. Sorry.
Yes. No problem. Glad you're here. You'll be able to contribute in the breakout. So just sort of what's your sense of the growth cycle, applying it in a church, applying it as an individual or in a small group or in one-to-one counseling or coaching, and anything else that you think about the cycle. And then sort of in addition to that, you might want to talk a little bit about, what's your biggest question about conducting the survey? So, Shane, are we ready to put people into their groups?
Yep. So we're gonna split you into 2 groups. So there'll be 4 or 5 in a group, and you'll have 7 minutes plus 60 seconds bonus, and then we'll come back and we'll have a bit of time to hear what you've chatted about.
Great.
Here we go.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We've had 2 more people join the group while you were out. Allison from, I'm going to say Glasgow, but I know you're in the Diocese of Glasgow, but maybe you're not in Glasgow. And Charles, who's joining for the first time. He's missed the first 2, so welcome, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you. Morning
Okay,
all.
so let's just take up, how many minutes do we have, Shane?
We should have 5 or 6 minutes, I think.
Okay. So, who was the spokesperson for breakout group number 1?
That would be me.
Okay, Matthew, what did you hear?
Well, we spent a lot more time talking about what we were reviewing from last week with the different steps of the cycle and how important it is to keep a church in the right step and not let them run out ahead. Of course, then sometimes you have to push them ahead when they want to stay planning, but to find out what the obstacles are and remove them and have different types of coaches for different needs. The only question we had time for regarding the survey was how long does it take? How long will it take before we have some data and some answers?
Okay. Well, I'll answer that very quickly, but we'll talk about it more when we get into the meat of the presentation today. But once the survey is input, like if the people reply electronically or they're transcribed in from paper, literally you can press the button and get the results in the next 5 minutes. In the old days, it used to take days. They'd have to send the data off, and then it would have to come back, and they'd have to produce the reports and send them to us, and so on and so on. But it's all automated now. So it might take 2 or 3 weeks to put the survey data in, but once it's all in, it's virtually instantaneous. And who is the spokesperson for group number 2?
I don't know. I'm going to suggest I didn't see what group number we were. I'm going to say that's me, though, Bill.
Okay. If you're the other group, yeah, you're number 2.
Right. Yeah. I was interested, not having gone through the cycle in people who were reporting in the group how that had gone for them, and I was trying to ascertain the process in terms of so you've got your, let's say, 30 questionnaires, and it goes through the process. I was just interested in the process, that health team, the reporting back, the whole discerning. I suppose once you have highlighted which is the area that you're going to work on, how that works. And I suppose, not having been here last week, I suppose the growth cycle actually helps you to itemize and plot out a way forward, not just to how to do, but sort of the stages involved, so that you know that you've actually worked well with that, the actual the specific area that you want to focus on. So in this particular instance, it was talking about worship and understanding how to work forward with that. I'm interested in the whole process, Bill. So it was the logistics of how you get from 30 questionnaires to that plotted out, if you like, growth cycle. So apologies for not being here that's last week, but that would be my reflection of where I am and what I'd like to learn about.
Okay. Anything else from group 2? Sue, Joe, Doug? No? Okay. Well, you'll get some answers today around the 30 people or the 50 people, and getting Shane's going to walk us through using the online system and so on. So hopefully that'll all become quite a bit clearer today. Okay, thank you, everybody. So today we're going to talk, our goals are to understand the process. Well, not just the process, but why we do the survey. If any of you've seen Simon Sinek or read his book, Start With Why, or seen his TED Talk, which is in the top 5 TED Talks ever, Start With Why. That's a good place to start with the survey too, when talking to people. Why are we doing this? I mean, it isn't just because the division or the conference or the diocese says we should. There's a reason we're doing this, and where we are in the test phase. We want to make sure that you're equipped to get people connected and engaged and owning the process. We also want to prepare you for some of the things that might go wrong or pitfalls in this phase. And being able to explain to people why they've been chosen to take the survey and why certain people aren't qualified to take. Some people get really antsy about disqualifying people from taking the survey. And it's not that they're not important. It's not that we don't want to hear from them. They will have a chance to speak into the process and the discussion later on. But the people who take the survey need to meet certain criteria. So we'll talk about those as well. Some of the steps in actually taking the survey and making it work and using the system, so that you'll understand how to generate results and get the documents and the suite of reports. And then we're going to talk some at the end about how to communicate as we go through the various phases in the cycle, and what to do, especially in the test phase, which is where the survey is. And then ultimately, we hope that you'll be able to engage people relationally, not just technically or mechanistically, and also how to stay faithful to the process and the tools. So that's kind of what we're hoping for today. So the church survey is really about testing our perception. So if you remember on the cycle, there's the perception phase. That's in the little picture, it was the person looking at the glass and saying it's half full, and the other person was looking at the glass and saying it's half empty. We are all perceiving what's going on in our churches. It's just like I'm constantly perceiving what's going on in my marriage. I'm constantly perceiving what's going on in my friendships. I'm constantly perceiving what's going on in my business. I'm constantly perceiving what's going on in my small group. We are perceiving what's going on. You can't help but have some ideas about what's going on and what the state of health is. So the church survey, and I think we said this last week, but every phase in the cycle is connected. They're not purely discrete, any one phase of the cycle from another. And so the test phase, this is right at the very top of the cycle, is about how accurately are we seeing? So in a sense, it's like we sort of think the church looks like this, but let's check. Let's get some feedback from the people. I would like to say it brings some objectivity to what are relatively subjective perceptions. So we've been in churches a long time. Some of us are church leaders. Most of us are church leaders. We have probably fairly accurate perceptions of what's going on in our churches, but we still should check to make sure that they're accurate before we start making some decisions about how are we going to move forward with removing barriers so that we can grow. And so if we're going to do this work to grow our church, not just numerically, but spiritually and relationally and so on, then we want to be fairly accurate, or to the degree we can be, we want to be as accurate as possible on our ability to see what's going on. And so that's what the test phase is about. So the survey is a listening tool. It's not just a scorecard. This isn't, if we can get people out of the mindset that this is something we're doing because someone upstairs told us to, or this is just, some people think, well, it's just like a satisfaction survey that I do at the hotel or at the restaurant after I've had my meal. No, this is something deeper than that. And what we know from the principles is that God grows things in certain ways. We know from Scripture and from nature and from the data we've seen, the evidence that we've seen in the church over the last 30 years, that God does grow things in certain ways. He grows the church in certain ways. And so the conditions have to be suitable. And that's what we're trying to do here, is let's get the conditions as suitable as possible so that we can remove the barriers that are limiting God from growing us as much as he'd like to. I remember thinking, wow, what's this got to do with us? God can do whatever he wants to grow the church. Well, yes, but we can also get in the way. I look at my own life and I think, God obviously wants me to grow it, to become who he's made me to be, who he wants me to be, and who he's called me to be, energized me to become. But I can get in the way of that. And so can God do whatever he wants? Sure he can. Can I get in the way? Yes, I can. And so we can also get in the way. And this is about how do we get out of the way? How do we remove those barriers? And that's why we're doing the survey. It's not just a mechanical activity. And so the survey is meant to help us identify what could help us to get to those ideal conditions. It's a listening tool. It's a way to start the conversation about what's going on here, what could be, what's going well, and what could be changed, etc. And you'll see across all of the NCD tools, I think even in the last year, it's become more and more evident that the maximum factor and the minimum factor, they're literally what this is all about. God loves us just as we are, but he also loves us so much he doesn't want to get stuck there. And so what's the maximum factor? What does God like about us? And so you see that in the wholeness test or any of the tests. You also see it in the church survey. What's the maximum factor? And then what's the minimum factor? Where would he like us to do some gardening so that we can grow? So this is very much about more than doing the survey. It's a spiritual activity, doing the survey. It's about listening. It's about listening to God and listening to God in and through one another. And so if people can see that this is not just a piece of paper or a few clicks on a phone, but this is actually participating in how God grows the church, I would hope that it'll maybe help get our energy focused and build ownership. Because it's not about just doing the survey. I don't even like the language of doing the survey. I always correct myself and say conducting the survey. And so if we can perceive and help our people perceive that this is about listening to God and listening to God through one another, or it's the start of that process of discernment, then I hope people can take it seriously. And so we need people to believe in the activity and its importance. They need to own this process and maybe have some sense of anticipation, a desire for clarity, a desire for direction. So if we're just really busy and we've got a ton of stuff to do, that will get in the way of us going, hang on a sec, let's just slow down a minute and find out what God's trying to say to us. And we can hear from God through one another. The church, the congregation needs to own the process, and the leaders, and I don't mean just the officer or the priest or the pastor, the leaders need to guide this process. And that's why we encourage a health team. And we're going to talk about health teams some more over the coming weeks. But this idea that we have a leadership team or a health team that is keen about cultivating and gardening, not controlling people or controlling the process or controlling the narrative, then we can be open to God shaping that narrative and ourselves speaking into that process together. Some of the pitfalls in this phase, and there can be lots of them, people can get stuck in the data. Sometimes I've had churches that, can we please see the raw data? And how did this average, how did this score? And especially back in the days when people could input the papers, or often input the paper themselves, they'd come back and they'd say, well, I don't know why this scored so low, because everybody scored it fairly high in the raw data. And I'd have to say, this is taking all of that raw data and scoring it against all the other questions in the survey. So you might have scored an overall 4, and another church might have scored an overall 4 in this question. But when you compare it to all the other questions in the survey and all the other questions in the surveys across the country, it's going to make the algorithm is going to score it quite differently. So getting caught up, and I like to say that while the survey is hugely accurate in driving us to the right conversations, it isn't accurate to the nearest decimal place. So whether something scores 45 or 46 isn't the issue here. But people will get caught up sometimes in that. Sometimes they'll get caught up in, was it the right sample group? Well, we're going to talk about how to choose the sample of people who take the survey. So hopefully we've done that pre-work before the survey is done, so we don't have to argue about, was it the right sample? But even then, some people say, oh, well, we didn't have enough young people, or we didn't have enough women, or we didn't have enough men, or if 10% of the people are under 20, then the sample shouldn't have more than 10% of, if you want to hear from the young people differently, then maybe there's other ways you can gather data. The wording of the questions, I've often seen that both before the survey and after. Oh, well, this question doesn't sound like us. I remember one time a Presbyterian church said, this doesn't feel very Presbyterian. Well, no, it doesn't. It's not. It's not Salvation Army. It's not Adventist. It's not Anglican. It's a global set of questions. And they have been tested and tested and tested to have the wording right. And so sometimes if there are words in a question that trigger a group, then it's important to have the conversation about what that is. Often with Anglicans, evangelism can be a trigger word. Some of the others of you from other denominations might think that's kind of funny or weird, but that's okay. Every denomination has its own issues with certain questions on the survey. Getting people, and sometimes in the first couple of cycles, you got to spend the time with people, getting them used to the questions. And over time, after the second or third survey, most churches are sort of comfortable with the questions and what they mean and where they're going. Often in this phase, this is part of the green phase, so it tends to be a little bit more cognitive than activist or relational or experiential, but this tends to be where the people who think more about their faith or are more cognitively oriented than maybe feeling oriented or intuitive or busy Martha types, the green people can be very, very focused on, very, very clear about what they think, because they've thought things through, and they can get stuck and rigid in their thinking. And so I remember one time a green church, a mainline church, said, we don't see anything here about social justice. And social justice was like 99% of what they thought church was about. But social justice is embedded in all the questions. And so getting them to stop thinking about not that social justice isn't important, but it's not the be all and the end all. And so sometimes we can get a little narrow in our thinking as well, and therefore be fearful of change. So if we get locked into the status quo and become defensive of it, sometimes we can even see that it's hindering and still cling to it. Because in our, over the last 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 years, we've been saying this is important. And so stepping away from that and going, okay, it's still important, but maybe we need to tweak it, can be. And I think the other thing around fear of change, sometimes people are afraid we're going to change everything. And so I think we have to, as leaders, say, look, we're just going to change some things. It doesn't mean we have to change everything. We've talked about single issue focus. And then if people don't want to own what they hear, or they don't want to own the process of trying to figure this out or step into it, it'll be limiting. And so some of those things about, who is God, and do we have a full, complete picture of who God is? Probably not, but sometimes we think we do. Or, we've got our doctrines, they're cast in stone. If this pushes us on some of our doctrinal beliefs or thinking, is that, can we do that? Can we have those conversations? Who we are with God and in God and because of God, and what is our identity in Christ, and so on. So all of those things may come up in the conversation, and they can be derailers, but they can also be the pinpoints of where the conversation needs to be had. So we're going to put you into breakouts again. What concerns might people bring you about the church, Shirley, and how to handle them? Are there any questions before we go out into the groups?
You'll have a total of 5 minutes in this group, and then we'll come back and maybe take up some key issues that you identify. So. Well, welcome back, everyone. So we're just gonna have a couple minutes here to hear what what concerns you think people might have, or maybe you've had people bring some concerns or questions to you already. So Matthew, group 1, what were the kind of main themes of your group?
The first question was fairly simple. What if we don't have a big enough church to get a subsection of 30 or so people? And the answer there, I imagine, is you just ask everybody. The other thing that we spent more time on was people concerned that they might not fully understand some of the questions, or once they see the questions, not be sure how to respond to them. I used the example of my church doing this, and we had 3 different preachers throughout the past 6 months or so, and the people who looked at the survey, some of them answered based on the lead pastor, who was one of them. Some of them answered based on the most recent, because the lead pastor had been away for 5 or 6 months, and some tried to do an average, and none of them asked me what they would do until after the fact, so I wasn't able to speak to that.
Right. Yeah, it can be helpful to make sure that people are a little bit prepped to understand some things that they might get asked, but we also don't want to overcoach them through how to answer the survey. So it can be helpful just to recognize, be familiar with the questions that people are going to be asked, and as part of the prep process for the survey, say, you might hear a term like pastor, and you can think about these things, but ultimately the survey is trying to assess people's perceptions. So even if people aren't coming at the questions with exactly the same unified view of things, we do want to capture their perception. And when we get the results, that can reveal itself and lead us to kind of consider what that might mean. We ask those questions like, isn't it interesting that people responded in this kind of way to this kind of question? But a little bit of prep work can be helpful.
Yeah.
How about I think it was Steve in group 2?
Yep. A lot of those points we covered slightly differently. Just a sense of understanding the question. Different people will understand the question differently, will hear it differently. the size of the church. We said that elderly people may need assistance to answer the questions. And also, I don't know if this is, it's an interesting one. The choice of respondents, if you've got a bigger church, the choice of respondents will dictate the results that you get, depending on which 30 you chose. And if it was, obviously, if it was a cross section, but if you skewed it towards one age group or one gender or all sorts of ways, my guess is it is possible to not to skew it, but the choice the choice of people may affect the results you get.
Yeah, we're going to talk right away here about selecting the sample, so we'll address those questions there, and I think we'll also, as we go through the rest of our time today, we'll be able to address the questions of what about people who need a little bit of help and online versus paper surveys and things like that. Bill, did you want to add anything about options if you have a particularly small church, like well under 30?
Sure. I'll do a quick summary there. We used to say you couldn't do the survey if you didn't have 30. I mean, that was a long time ago. So you may still hear echoes of people that have been around a long time thinking, oh, well, we don't have 30, we can't do it. No, that's not true. We should never have said that. We should have been saying, if you've got 25, survey the 25. At that point, you're not doing a sample. It's like the difference between an MRI and a full body scan versus a blood sample or something. I haven't got my metaphor perfectly, but if you've got 25 people and you've got 25 people in the survey, you've now taken 100%. If you've got 33, you can do 30, it'll be enough, and you can do 33, it's fine. We used to also say you can't do more than 30 because it was so complicated processing the data. So that 30 number has gotten locked into a lot of people's minds. But if you have a church of 100 or 200 or 300, 30 is enough statistically. Now, some people won't like that number. They'll think, oh, it can't possibly be, but statistically it is. So, but it's really easy to do 50 or 60. But going back to under 30, if you've got 25, do 25. If you've got, I've seen churches of 12 and 13 do surveys. And I remember the first time thinking, gosh, if you've got a group of 12, how could you not know what to talk about? Why would you need the survey to tell you? And I thought, no, my parents' church had about 12 people and they didn't know what to talk about. When it came to growth, they would talk about keeping the roof on and having strawberry socials. That's what they thought growth was about. And so, can it be too small? And so Doug will know that I'm working with some churches near Belfast where we're encouraging some of the churches with under a dozen, maybe just do the wholeness test. So we'll talk about that more later. But certainly you can do under 30. Feel free to. I wouldn't probably go much less than a dozen.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to talk about the participation requirements, the criteria a bit more here now. And then we're going to quickly send you back into a breakout group to talk about a couple of scenarios. We'd like to get your thoughts about how to deal with a couple of scenarios that we've seen come up commonly when you're in the process of selecting participants for the survey. And so we'll give you that exercise shortly here, and then we'll come back and take it up. And then after that, we will have a chance to get into the online portal and show you how that works if you're not familiar with it. So there are kind of three main criteria that we want to keep in mind. And the reason may on some levels kind of be obvious, but also we know that when we hit these criteria that statistically we have a very, very reliable survey result. And in general, we know from the research that was done, the original research, that the survey is highly reliable. I was interested to look back at some of the original research a few months ago and go through it, and I see it when I debrief churches, how people are recognizing themselves clearly in the survey, but that is backed up by the research and the statistical data. So what are the criteria? Well, we're looking for people who are involved in the life of the church, right? So we're looking for people who are, regular participants in the main worship service, who are involved in the life of the church. And so we're looking for somebody kind of a baseline like that, but we're looking for somebody who's involved in a group of some sort. Many of the questions that will be encountered on the survey are asking about a small group experience. So this is where just a little bit of forethought about what people will relate to when they come up to a question about a small group can be helpful. So what do we mean by a small group? And is involved in some sort of ministry or task at the church. Doesn't have to be, really significant. You don't have to be a, in front of everybody sort of leader, but is involved in that way, is more than just showing up and making an appearance, right? They have some sort of role to play, some small tasks to have in the church, and they're committed to the health and growth of the church, right? They're interested in the church, they're involved in the church, and they're committed to it. In all of this, and so when I go through this process with my church, we kind of get the list of everybody to make sure we're not missing people, and we just sort of group people as we go down the list and recognize those people who hit the criteria. And then we will look at who we're left with and do a kind of an assessment as, is this sample that we're left with, does it represent the demographic of the church? So if we got a age distribution and a gender distribution that kind of is representative of what our church looks like in the sample that we're going to select. And we can also think about who are we inviting to participate, who's been around for a long time versus who's been new. And so do we have a representation that reflects, how many new people we've got, or newer people we have in our mix versus people who've been around for a long time. So the whole idea here is just to get people who are going to be able to respond to the survey effectively, who really have a view inside the church, to give us a good representation, and then we can decide who we're actually going to invite. As Bill was saying earlier, it's good if we can hit 30 or a very large percentage of the church if it's a smaller church, but the way we can do things digitally now, I had got a church that's doing a survey right now, and they were worried that they could only have 30 people participate, and they didn't want to exclude people. If you've got 40 people or 50 people who fit your criteria and are representative of the demographic, then you can absolutely invite all those people to participate. So we're going to go into a breakout here, and we're going to give group one the first two questions here. And then we're going to give group two the next two questions. So what we want you to do is just look at these questions and tell us how you would deal with this situation. So the first two questions are, you've got a long-standing, well-loved member of your church, but they don't fit all the criteria. They're not involved in a small group of any kind. So what do you do about a situation like that? Second question is, a person fits all the criteria, but they have openly expressed resistance to NCD and the church survey. So what do you do about a situation like that? So that's group one. Group two, your questions will be, you've got church leaders who are concerned that people are feeling excluded if you've only got 30, if you've only got 30 people to participate. And they've suggested inviting everybody in the church to participate in the survey. So how do you handle that? And your last question for group 2 is you've got a church that's doing their second church survey. And there's been a bit of change in people who are showing up since the first survey. But the leadership wants to use the exact same participant list as last time. So as they're thinking, they can get a real apples to apples comparison to what this exact set of people thought the first survey versus how they're going to respond to the second survey. So I think we're going to give you a total of 8 minutes in this breakout.
No, total of 7.
Total of 7.
6 plus 60. Yeah.
6 plus 60. Okay. And then we'll come back and hear your thoughts about it. Curious to hear your thoughts about how to deal with these situations. So let's start with we'll start with group 1. We'll go in order on the questions here. So Matthew, what did group 1 think would be good ways to deal with these first 2 problems?
Well, our answers for both of them ended up being a bit similar. If you can meet your quota without these people, then it's probably simpler to find somebody else to fit it. With the first one, it's important to have people who can actually answer the questions.
Yeah.
So if someone can't answer the small group questions or hasn't been coming to a worship service and won't answer those questions, then they aren't going to help the overall profile very much. Especially if the survey requires the question to be answered anyway, so they just have to throw something in.
Mm.
And if someone's resistant for the second question, well, if a gentle explanation doesn't work in the first place, they're going to come in annoyed and they're going to rank everything a little more vindictively, and that's not going to help either. So if you can get a decent sample without either of these people, I'd say find other people who fit better. If you have a very small church, then you may have to work with what you have.
Yeah. Those are fine approaches. And I think also both of these situations are opportunities to work on the relational aspect that we're aiming for. And so, if we've got somebody who's, well loved and been around for a long time and they just don't fit the criteria, then it's an opportunity just to make sure that we're messaging ahead of time, but also maybe specifically to that person that, there's an opportunity for you to participate in this process, but just to be transparent about what it is that we're trying to achieve with how we're selecting the sample size. And but everybody can have a way to participate. So if you've got people who are really keen, but they just don't fit the criteria, we can be letting them know that they're absolutely valued, and they'll have a way to hear the results and provide feedback into them. The resistance question is interesting. I think that's also an opportunity maybe to just talk about that. I mean, it's okay to be resistant is what I would say. We don't want to push people too hard, but we can also be transparent about the reasons, and it's an opportunity to understand, I wonder why that person is resistant. Just to understand that could be helpful to the church. Group 2, how about your dilemmas? What did you think about them, Steve?
Leaders feel people are excluded, 30 chosen. So we suggested that one of the answers was, well, I think as many as want to ought to be able to fill in the questionnaire. Another response was, tell the church that the survey is going on, and the invitation was extended. If you would like to take part, then please come and talk to us, and we can see where that goes. But it was always to sort of end game of including people.
Right.
As far as the last question, the second survey, since last time new people have joined, leadership wants to use the same people. I have to say, sorry, one member of our group said that their response would be, don't be so silly. And the other response, which is actually in line with that, of course, is that it is the group that we pick needs to be representative of the church as it is now. Hence, would be the rationale for changing the group to reflect that.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the same set of people to have any impact on this, on the reliability of the survey. If the main thing is if we're selecting people who fit the criteria, then we can be confident that it's going to give us a representative result. So there may be a lot of the same people, but absolutely be thinking about how that list changes from survey to survey. On the question about, being inclusive in terms of who we're inviting, that's fine as long as people fit the criteria. So just taking approach of we're going to invite everybody regardless of what the criteria are or whether they fit into it or not. Yeah, that can be a bit of a problem, as well-meaning as it might be. So that's good. Great. So we're going to get into administering the survey now, and eventually we'll get to kind of a live demo. But we're going to just set the stage for that a little bit first. So we can provide offline help to navigating the portal online as much as might be needed. But you're going to log into ncd.life at the link that's shown here. There's actually a couple different ways to kind of get to this link, but if you're doing it in English, then this is kind of ultimately the URL that you're going to end up with. And depending on your situation, you might be receiving a login from Fort Elm, or you might be getting a login through your church organization. So what do you need to get started? So you need your login. You need to know where to go. So once we've got that figured out, then what you'll need is your participant list. So once you've got your participant list and you've got some basic information for the what's called sometimes the pastor form or the facilitator form, then we can be all set to go and start to input data into the system. If you have got paper surveys, so a paper survey is accessible from inside the portal. In some cases, you may have a slightly customized paper survey form that you might be using, and but you can download the English paper survey from the portal here if you don't have anywhere else you can get it. Once you got all that, then we can log in here and get going with things. And yeah, so this is what you're going to see when you show up in the portal, and yeah, so you have your username and password, and then you can truck along and log in. Now, just a word about the paper and the digital survey. So the paper survey form that is available will have some instructions on it. They're the same or very similar instructions as to what people will see when they do this online, either on their computer or on their phone or a tablet. So that's an option for people. If you've got people who are not familiar with or not comfortable with computers or smartphones and would prefer to do a paper survey, then that's absolutely fine. There's just some manual data entry that will have to be done for those paper surveys. So the electronic is convenient, but the paper works just fine as well. A little bit of extra legwork for that. There was a question earlier about what to do about, I think it was specifically around elderly people who might need assistance with the questions. And there's a couple of ways that can be dealt with. You could provide them with a paper survey, or they could be set up with access to a link of their own. But somebody with a tablet or a smartphone or a computer could kind of help them respond to the questions. In that situation, we just want to make sure that people aren't being coached about what they should answer to a question. But that's an option as well. Sometimes there can be a bit of a challenge in getting a good response from people. in terms of, getting the sample to respond in a timely fashion. One thing that you could think about is having a bit of a survey party, if you will. So even if you're doing it digitally, or maybe you have a mix of digital responses and paper responses, you could invite everybody to a coffee hour after church where we're going to all sit down, we're going to do our surveys, and you can kind of get the bulk of them done. If there's any kind of questions that might come up that everybody's kind of wondering about, then you could address them all at that time. And so that's something that you might think about, is kind of doing it as a group, even if people are doing it from their own smartphones or computers. So we're going to get into a bit of a demonstration here. So we'll show you how to get a survey started, how to get people added to it. We'll show you how to get the links sent out to them. We'll show you a bit of the facilitator form, or what's sometimes called the pastor form, and we'll get into the how to find a paper survey in the portal, and how to deal with reminders, closing the survey up, and then getting to generating results. Bill, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick note for those from the Diocese of Glasgow. Dawn is doing all of the inputting for you of the paper survey, so you don't have to know all of the detail of this, and it varies by denomination. And I mean, some have us do it at Fort Elm, some do it themselves, some have the system is built so that each church can do it themselves, but some denominations prefer to keep it a little bit centralized. What churches find is because they only do it once a year, they don't understand the data or the portal very well, and so on and so on. So for those of you who aren't inputting the data, don't get too worried if you're going, oh, I didn't know I needed to know this.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to understand how this works in the background, even if you don't have to do it yourself. And we'll show you after this live demo what people are going to see when something shows up in their inbox. So what participants are going to see when things show up in their inbox. So we're going to take the next 15 or 20 minutes and walk through some key things inside the portal. So once you've logged into the portal, you're going to see something that looks like this. This is my kind of personal account, and you'll see a number of options across the top of the screen here. So you'll see a results menu, a start a survey menu, an incomplete menu, a tokens menu, and a my account menu. So we're looking at the my account menu. But if you're starting the church survey for the first time, then you can go to the obvious place, and we can start a new survey. And you also have the option here to edit an existing one if you've got one on the go. But if you go to the incomplete menu here at the top, that will also take you to any surveys that you've initiated but are not yet completed. So you'll see them listed here. In this case, I'll just start a new survey. And, it's very simple to get started. We're just going to enter the name of our church. And it's going to ask you some questions about how many church surveys have been done, including this one when it's finalized. So we'll assume that this church is doing it for the first time. So we'll say 1. And it's going to ask you if you would like to invite some or all of your survey participants to complete the survey online. So unless you don't have anybody who's doing it online, then we'll say yes to this question. And then it's immediately going to take you to the option to start adding people's names into the form here. If you have a list of people that you've got in a Word document or a spreadsheet or something like that, that makes this a little bit easier. But there's no way to import that list in its entirety. So if you have a spreadsheet with the names, you can just copy and paste the names into the fields here, but you will have to do that copy and paste manually. We can't receive a list in its entirety and have it automatically import, at least not currently with the platform. So we'll add a name here. And then we can just keep doing that until we get all the people that we want to have on the list here. And if you're not quite done with adding to this, you don't want to send the invitations out just yet. You might want to do that at a particular time, or once you've got everybody added. Just make sure you click this box here that says "Don't send participant invitations at this stage," and then it will not send those invitations out just yet. And then you can have an option here to remind people. So this will be an automated reminder from the system in however many days after it's sent to give people a little nudge in their inbox. Now you also have an option here to customize the invitation message. There's an invitation message which is kind of standard here. And so this will be populated with their name. If you want to change anything here, you can. But my suggestion is that before we send the invitations out from the system, that it can be helpful for people to get an invitation or an ask that we'd like you to participate in the survey, and to receive that from somebody who they know in the church. Because this system is going to generate an email that's going to come from, an unfamiliar address. It's going to come from NCD. And so a nice way to encourage people to participate and invite them into the process is to, send that list that you've got a heads up that, hey, we'd like you to participate in the survey. Please let us know if you would not like to participate, or please let us know if you will. We really like to see everybody who's been selected and invited participate, because we've gone through the effort of selecting a nice sample. We really, really genuinely want to hear from that sample. And so to get 100% participation is really what we should be aiming for. If somebody really doesn't want to or can't because of a current situation, then it'd be better maybe just to exclude them this time around. So you can save this information and come back to it later if you like. And in this case, for this survey, you can see the status of all your participants. So you'll see the name here. You can see that this person has not yet been invited, and there's no reminder. If we want to edit any of that information, we can hit the edit button, and we can adjust that. Okay. If you go to your incomplete menu, then you'll see all the church surveys that you've got that are open. And so you can get into an ongoing survey from that point. Once an invitation has been sent out, sometimes people will say, I didn't get the invitation. They can't find it in their junk mail or something like that. If you need to personally email somebody an invitation link, it's important to know that the link is not the same for everybody. Everybody has a unique link. So if you need to find that link, you can go into this view invitation option, and you'll find here that person's unique survey link. And you can copy that, and if you need to text it to them, or there's sometimes a couple people who just need that kind of personal approach, then that's how you can find their link. Okay. Also here, you can send people reminders if you want. You can edit their email address if you find out you've got the wrong email address. And it's also from this window that you'll be able to add paper participants. So I'm not going to go through the process today of how to add paper responses, but this is where you will do that. So it'll just walk you through here the process of taking all those paper surveys, inputting the responses from those surveys into the online system here. So it's a bit of a manual process. So just be aware of that as you're issuing the paper results or the paper surveys. Okay. The pastor form, or the facilitator form, as it's called in the system here, this will need to be filled out as well. There's quite a lot of information here that's actually asked for, but you know, the results are not going to depend on the responses to this information, really. So we need to have a survey date, and you know, it's helpful to enter the information about the church, the address and whatnot, the name of the pastor. Contact information is helpful. There will be questions about the pastor. There will be questions about the church and the size of the church. The key things that we need to get in the survey to generate a good result are the attendance, because in one of the reports there's an attendance report for the past number of years. So when we're completing this, it's important to, you know, if we're in 2026, we would enter kind of our current attendance at our weekly worship services, and then our average attendance from last year, and then 2 years ago, and so on until we get that added. Again, this isn't going to change the core results, but if we don't fill this out correctly, then you will have kind of an inaccurate looking attendance report on that particular output. There's questions here about church planting, and you know, whether you answer these questions or input them into the result or not isn't going to impact what your reports really look like when they come out at the end of the day. It's helpful information to maybe record, but it's not absolutely necessary to generate a result. So once all that is saved, we can you know, look at our incomplete surveys and decide whether we want to close the survey. So once we've got responses from people, we'll have the option to close the survey. And I think I can't close this one, Bill, because I probably don't have responses.
I also think you don't have any tokens, and you maybe haven't completed the facilitator form.
Facilitator form. Yeah, the facilitator form has to be done.
You have to put something in there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If you save that, you should be able to.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be able to generate. Anyway, we won't spend too much time trying to fill in the facilitator form.
Do you want me to pull one up on the screen, or?
No, I think
Okay.
when you get this information input, then there will be an option that shows up here to close the survey. And at that point, we'll be able to generate results. So I just did want to talk for a couple of minutes here about tokens. So there are these things that are called tokens. And so this is what this is what you need in order to generate the result. So you can actually go through most of this whole process of sending invitations out, getting people set up in the system, and sending the invitations and getting responses. You need the token at the point that you're trying to generate the results. And our next session next week is going to be about looking at the reports that we get. But when we are at the point where we've closed the survey and we're ready to generate results, you want to have two tokens in your list of available tokens. So on the screen here, you can see my available tokens. I don't have any in my profile right now, but you'll need a basic token and you'll need what's called an NCD results guides token, or sometimes called an advanced token. And then we'll go through the process of we use a basic token to generate a basic result. Once the basic result is generated, then we'll be able to generate the NRG or the advanced results. So I'm just going to stop sharing here for a second. Has anybody got any questions, anything they've seen so far? How much have I confused people? Have you seen enough? Do you want to see more of something?
I have a question.
Yep.
Shane, is this something we have access to at all times, or we'll need to purchase it? Because I've already done a survey with my church last year, and the idea was we're going to focus on the one element we saw as a weakness in our church for the next year. Then we'll do another survey to kind of gauge where we are. And focus on kind of like the next weakness. So is this something we have access to all the time, or we need to purchase it every time we use it?
Yeah, no, so access is available all the time. Once you've got a login, then that login's always gonna work for you. The only thing that needs to be acquired are the tokens. So in your case, you're getting them from your conference. And so you'll ask for a token from Debbie, and she'll give you a token, and then you can use that token to generate your results. Yeah.
Okay.
Henry's church might have been coached by a different coach. Henry, did you coach your own church, or did someone else coach your church?
Somebody else coached my church.
Yeah, so your survey profile is probably sitting in their account.
Right.
If you're in a situation, if you're in a situation like that where there was a different person who did some surveys in the past for the church, then they can transfer those results to a new coach they like, or you can reach out to us for help with that, which might be an easy thing to do.
Okay. And are you going to
if you're going to self-coach the next survey, Henry, you'll want to get the first survey from the previous coach into your account. Because when you do your second survey, you'll want to be able to have both the first profile and the second profile, so you can compare them when you create the advanced profiles called NRGs.
Okay. And are you going to show us how to create the login? Is that something you're going to show us to do, or we do that on our own?
You'll request a login. So depending on your situation, so you request a login from either us directly, or you'd perhaps arrange that through your conference, or let your conference know, in your case, Debbie. But I think do you have a login, Henry?
Okay.
Do you?
I don't have.
Okay.
All right.
A
Thank
quick
you.
question, if you don't mind, to Bill. Bill, as far as you remember, the Seventh Adventist Conference in Ontario, they have a system where we go through them.
Yes, but I think they'll open an account for you, and you'll administer the survey, I think, directly. But they have all the tokens at the conference level. So for those of you who aren't Adventists, a conference is like a division or a diocese, and the conference, it varies by denomination, whether it's centralized or decentralized. And in the Ontario Conference of the Adventists, they have the tokens, but I think they create an account for you, or have us create one for you. But you go through Pastor Lee.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes,
you can contact him and get it set up with him.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions so far? Okay, I'm just going to show you. So we'll go back to a share here, and
can I just ask one quick question? I just want to ask Doug. Doug, the churches in Belfast, are they each administering their own surveys through they're each doing their own, I think, aren't they? Can't hear you, Doug.
So ask that question again, Bill. I just had some noise in the background.
Yeah, are each of your churches administering their surveys themselves?
Yeah, so we've got usually an assistant, to the pastor who's, is leading on the survey and with the health team.
Okay, so as you can see, so in Ontario, for the Salvationists in the room, in the Ontario division, we administer all of that on behalf of all of the churches. We open the accounts, and whether the Northwest division is going to set up that way or not, I don't know. It'll be a decision we need to make. Do we want Fort Elm to do that, all the work that Shane's just showed you, or do we want that done at the division, or do we want the coaches to do it, or do we want each corps to do their own? So that's a decision we'll need to make fairly soon. In the Anglican Diocese of Glasgow and Galloway, Don's administering all of that locally. And they're all using, and all of your churches are using paper surveys because we're using, as Shane said, you can use a slightly abridged version of it, or an amended version. And so we have a Scottish Episcopal version of the form. So it can't be done electronically. So this gets rather customized, and some of you are probably going, why do I need to know all this? You don't, but it varies. And so we're trying to show you at least the basics. And as Shane says, even if you don't have to do all of this back end stuff, it's good to know that someone's doing it.
And it's good to know what people are going to see. So here I'm showing you what people are going to get in their inbox. So what people can anticipate. This is helpful to prep people. So you can let people know they're going to get if they're participating online, they're going to get an email from NCD Church Survey. The email address that they're actually going to see is going to come from hello@ncdlife.org. So in some cases, this might appear in somebody's junk mail folder. But you can just prep people to recognize that this is a real thing. We've asked you to participate. When this shows up, don't be suspicious of it. It's real and it's safe to respond to. So this is generally what it's going to look like for them in the email, either for the initial survey notification, when they get a reminder. And then each person is also going to get, when they complete the survey, their personal results. So they'll kind of get their personal profile, if you will. Steve, you got a question?
Yeah, just quickly. I noticed the emails will be coming from hello@ncdlife.org. And then down at the very bottom, it shows ncd.life.
Yep.
So those are two different items. And I'm just making sure that both I have consistent spelling, but that I advise survey takers to not sort of put an extra dot in or whatever, just to make sure that ncd.life is not the same as ncdlife.org. It is the same, but it's not.
It's all saved. So if they're getting an email from ncdlife.org or they're seeing a link to ncd.life, it's all part of the same system.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And as I said, because this is what they're going to receive, this is not going to, look like a typical email that they might get from their church or from their pastor or leader in the church. This is where it can be really helpful just to set people up who are going to be invited, to ask them if they would participate, and just to let them know that they'll get an email from NCD when the time comes. I think that I've found that to be helpful in getting good responses and quick responses.
And I would add, for those of you who are doing all paper, I'd still send out that email like Shane's suggesting, even if you're not advising them that they're going to be getting an email from NCD, it's still a good idea for the church or the coach or somebody to send out a note saying, here's what's going to be happening, and we're going to be doing the survey on this day, and so on. But some of that prep stuff is valuable, I think, from the church or the coach in advance, regardless of whether you're doing paper or electronic.
Yeah. And I'm just going to share one more thing that people will see. So when they've completed the survey online, and there's a nice big print on it. So if you're doing it on your phone, it's no hindrance. It's quite doable on a smartphone. or a computer, whatever, they will get their personal result. So this isn't something that gets shared back as part of the reporting we provide, but as individuals do the survey online, it's kind of an extra plus, I guess, of doing it online. You do kind of get your personal take on what your perception of the church is. Now, this obviously will be when all these are aggregated, we'll get the whole church profile, but people do get the chance to kind of see how they fit into the overall picture. So be aware that they're going to get that. You might want to suggest to people that when they get to this screen, that they might be interested in saving it and recognizing how their personal result might be different a little bit from the aggregate result of the whole church. So that's kind of an interesting feature that hasn't always existed. Okay, I think we need to move on.
Did you say that that personal survey element comes back from those who have done it online only?
Yeah, you'll get that right away. So as soon as you submit the result for your personal response, you immediately will be taken to the screen where you'll see your kind of personal take on things, and you can save a PDF version of that if you want. You can download a copy of it. But you won't naturally get that if, as far as I know, if you're doing a paper survey.
Because you're not identified on that survey.
Yeah. We had a little time for Q&A. If there are any additional questions, you can let them out now. Otherwise, Bill's going to take us through the last bit of time we have. We'll talk a little bit more about communication.
Okay, seeing no hands up, I think we'll proceed. I know for some of you, some of that was more than you needed, but we're just trying to make sure we capture everybody there. So, okay. Now we're going to talk about communication and how to prepare for the survey, how to communicate with people through the process and after the survey and what comes next and so on. So the goal here is that I think most important is talking about why are we doing the survey, and then we can talk about what is it and who's doing it and when are we doing it and how do we do it and all that mechanics. But if any of you have ever seen Simon Sinek's video on Start With Why, I think I mentioned it earlier in the session. I'm not suggesting that you send out the video of Simon Sinek with Start With Why, but I would recommend starting with why. Why are we doing this? And I think it's important for people to see that this is spiritual work, and it's not just a technical event that's going on here. This is entering it. This is like going to a church service and listening to a sermon or singing a hymn, or for those of us who celebrate the Eucharist. I mean, this is spiritual work. This is listening to one another and trying to hear from God through one another on some levels. I mean, I know it's paper or you're holding it in your phone and it maybe doesn't feel very spiritual, but this is important work. And so I think that starting with why is really, really important. And in the early days of NCD, churches were encouraged to preach on each of the 8 quality characteristics and maybe have some small group study stuff. And we've gotten away from focusing so much on the prep. And as I was preparing for today, I was thinking maybe we've gone too far away from the preparation activity. And in the diocese that Stephen and Shane and I are in, we had a bishop who wrote up a whole series of biblical reflections on each of the 8 quality characteristics. I mean, that's how seriously it can get taken. And I would argue we can take it not seriously enough. And so explaining to people why. It's also important for them to understand that the test phase is linked to other phases in the cycle. So yes, the coach is really concerned about the phases, and maybe the health team is really concerned about the phases, but I think it's important for the congregation to own that entire process. This isn't a one-time thing that we're going to do and then it's done and, well, maybe we'll hear something. Or I mean, this is a conversation that should be going on in the church all year long. This is part of the process of that conversation about how do we grow. And some people will come back and say, well, our church doesn't need to grow. We're happy with it the way it is, because if we're going to grow, we have to change. And but this isn't just numerical growth either. A healthy church is expected to grow numerically. That's just how God grows living organisms. And if our congregation is a living organism, it should grow. But it's not you should be growing, you people, but it is let's step into this conversation with God about how God wants to grow our church. And so these principles and the why we're doing it and how it fits into the bigger picture, maybe even into the theology or the doctrine of the church, how God works at growing his church. That's what we're participating in here. And so the cycle, the principles, why we're doing it, and then maybe listen to fears, concerns, apprehensions. What tensions are underneath? In our church, they had some hangups about evangelism and what evangelism means, and they're thinking about people on the street corner pounding people to evangelize, and that's the baggage they bring to this conversation. And so, listening to people and their concerns and their tensions and what baggage they might be bringing. I go to some churches and there's a question about when someone does a good job, we have praise and compliments, and there's another question about our church as a culture of praise and compliments, and people will say to me, well, we shouldn't be praising and complimenting one another. This should be done as unto the Lord. And I'm like, yes, but we know that people find out what their gifts are by when they're encouraged and so on and so on. So people from all sorts of every denomination comes with its own baggage, and each congregation comes with its own, and each person comes with their own, depending on what their family of origin, their church of origin, where they're going to church now, the denomination and the theology training they've had, etc. So listening to people's concerns and angsts and apprehensions is fruitful work. But really, we want to get to the place of why are we doing this? How is it going to happen? Why are we doing it? And why should you participate? And who else is participating? These are the people that have been invited to join. Everybody will be welcomed back into the conversation when the survey results come back. So even if you don't qualify to take the survey, you're not going to be excluded from the conversation. In the old days, we used to invite the 30 people. We'd survey 30 people, only 30 max, and then we'd invite that same 30 back for the debrief. Now it's like, no, bring everybody in. Let's all talk about what's going on. And then when is the survey happening? How are we going to participate? And when will we find where and what will we find out about the result? We're going to have it. The health team's going to be debriefed by Fort Elm or the division or the denomination, etc. And then there's going to be a story guide conversation where we'll all be able to participate in what the results showed. And then we can talk about, is that consistent with my experience? And as Shane says, maybe if you did the survey online and you got that individual response saying this is what you scored it, maybe bring that with you because you'll be able to enter into the conversation about your experience at the church. And so, sort of building some, not just enthusiasm or rah-rah, but concern for the conversation about health and growth, I'm just convinced is fundamental work that we need to be doing, because this, again, the health and growth conversation shouldn't be a one-time event each year. Health and growth should be underpinning everything we're doing. Is this outreach work? Is this food kitchen work? Is this breakout group? Is this retreat that we're going on? Are these the things that are helping us to become healthy so that God can grow our church? So we talked a little bit about this last week, but communicating, keep the congregation abreast of the progress through the process. Every once in a while, just a quick announcement from the health chair. We're going to be doing the survey. Some of you have been receiving the tests. We're going to be getting debriefed when the survey is going to be done on X date. We'll be debriefed, then we're going to have the story guide, and then when that we typically suggest that not all the data be presented to the congregation. A summary is fine. I have had churches where they say, if I don't send out the reports to everybody, they're going to think I'm hiding something. That's very rare. In my experience, if the results are summarized and people know where we are in the process, that keeps everybody happy. When they don't get any feedback or they don't get any communication, then they start to wonder if we're trying to hide something. And that's why I think this is just change management, whether you're inside a church or you're outside a church. Keeping people abreast of how we're doing is fundamental to healthy change. Ensure leaders and key influencers are on board. So when you get to this, I would suggest make sure that the leaders and key influencers are on board all the way through the cycle. But certainly when it gets to the understand phase and listening to one another and listening to God and trying to discern what the primary barrier or barriers are, we might identify 20 barriers and we're going to have to prioritize one or two. But then we can step into the plan phase. And so people need to understand why we're undertaking this exercise and why we're going through this process and cycle the way we are, because this is the way God grows stuff. This isn't NCDs, or it's not corporate land change management process. This is just this is fitting in with the way God grows things. And then an honest approach to strength and growth areas. Let's be honest with ourselves about what God likes about how we operate this church. And he's completely happy with us where we are. And he loves us so much that he wants us to not get stuck there. And so this idea that, okay, now we've got an honest and shared vision or perception of what's going on here. And it's a validated perception and understanding of what's going on. Now we can plan and then actually work towards removing those barriers. We're going to send you back into breakout group. Do we have time for this, Shane?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. This is just a quick little scenario. Church of 100 people. Most of the people are old. About 60 come on a Sunday normally. Most of them are on email. Some aren't. Not all of them read the emails when they come from the church. They typically have a coffee hour after church on Sunday or Saturday if it's Adventist. This is their first survey, and they're sort of on board. And so just the goal here is, how would you communicate with this congregation in anticipation of the survey? Shane, anything more to set up there?
Yeah, we just want you to just kind of look at this scenario and just discuss a few things that you think would be useful or helpful to think about as you're thinking about how to communicate this, and think about the relational stuff, because we want this to be an opportunity to build on relationship and engage people, and for it not to feel mechanistic. So just take a look at the scenario, bubble up a few thoughts that you think would be helpful if you were conducting this church survey. How, in this situation, what do you think would be effective? What would be helpful to people? Maybe 5 minutes, Bill, or
okay.
6
And you
minutes,
put
yeah.
this into the chat?
I have, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Group 2. I think is that Matthew?
Group 2, Steve.
Steve, let's let group 2 go first this time. Switch it up.
Yeah. In that particular scenario, it was mentioned that it was set up for the informality of the after main service, main meeting setting, to be able to talk about things. I suggested an informal Q&A session if it was concerning congregational issues, that they could do the survey together in the same place, so that any questions that came up could be answered as people were answering the questions. It was suggested that the NCD video could be shown in the main service, which would maybe help to allay any fears or concerns that people had, and that if there were concerns in the leadership team about the process, that they would really need to be approached, answered, talked through before it came to presenting it to the whole church.
Matthew, what did your group talk about?
Well, we had some very similar thoughts there, especially about the social time. Our focus was often on make sure that it's clear the leadership is on board as much as they are, and that this is something that the church is doing intentionally. It's not just one more thing being imposed. But also we wanted to make sure there were things like images or videos so that it was more accessible for people who aren't going to read a whole thing, or for people who just learn more visually, and make sure that any needs are accommodated, and make sure that everything is approachable and explained in person, because we had a bit of fun talking about how nobody really reads the church's weekly emails from a lot of different churches.
There seems to be a theme here. Okay. Well, thank you for that. We're just coming up on closing. Our next session is going to be about debriefing the results. Typically, we like to do that with the health team. Sometimes we do it with the pastor first if there's a real major problem where we don't want the pastor to be blindsided. But typically with the health team, sometimes with the health team and the leadership team, if they are distinct groups, if it's a small church and there isn't a separate health team, then maybe the leadership team. I find groups of more than 6 or 7, it can get to be a little big for a debrief. But we like to go into a bit of detail during the debrief, and more detail with the leadership team or the health team than with the wider congregation. And so that debrief happens before, and then we go to the congregation. So we'll talk a little bit about the story guide meeting next week as well. And then the big activity then becomes discerning barriers. And we're going to walk through quite a bit of effort, or how we approach that discernment phase in the understand phase. So I'm going to pray, and some of you are going away for the rest of your afternoon. Some of you are just starting your day, but I'll pray your God's blessing on whatever part of your day you have left. Heavenly Father, thank you for being together again. We thank you for the way you have led us in this conversation. I pray that each person has taken away what they need, and that you will germinate it and grow it. And we just thank you for the way you do grow things, and the way you grow squirrels and trees and humans and churches. You are the designer of us all, of all of it. So no wonder you have the keys to life itself. And so we put ourselves in your hands. Help us to get out of the way if we're barriers or have barriers in our own lives and in our churches. And so we just thank you and praise you. And I pray that you will take what we've done today and produce fruit from it, fruit that lasts. Amen.